Hello everyone, welcome back to another video where I share tutorials on making games in LÖVE 2D. So last time we made a very basic game. I'm going to pull it up to the screen so that we just kind of get a quick reminder. So essentially what we did, right, was this game where you're a ball and then you shoot projectiles across the screen to score points, and there's a goalie that's trying to block you from scoring points. This is a very basic game, and we kind of focused on user input and making sure there was some game logic. And what we're going to do now is we're going to give this game a big facelift. Essentially, let me pull up what the finished product is going to look like. We're going to add a character, we're going to add some animation, and the focus today is going to be on that animation piece. So making sure that the character looks like he's moving on the screen. And we're also going to make things a little bit more interesting by changing the speed of different objects so that it's more challenging. All right, so with that said, let's get into it. So I'm going to pull up Visual Code, and I'm going to open up the code that we wrote last time. And then what you'll see here is I added a new script called class.lua and then a sprite sheet called skifree win3 sprite sheet. So let me start with a sprite sheet. So the sprite sheet here, so this is like the skifree game sprite sheet. And then you can see there's a bunch of different characters. There's the skiers, there's the Yeti, there's different finishing line, start line, trees, etc., etc. And what we're actually going to focus on is the first 4 images of the Yeti. And so the first 2 are the Yeti being idle, and then the next 2 are the Yeti running or chasing the skier. So what we're going to do is we're essentially going to cycle through these images to create that animation. All right, so to do that, if I go back to my main.lua, what we're going to start with is we're going to load the sprite sheet in. So in love.load, I'm going to create a sprite sheet object, sprite sheet, and that's going to be love.graphics.new image, and then I'm just going to copy in the sprite sheet name. Boom. There we go. And so what I've done here is I'm actually saving the entire sprite sheet in the object sprite sheet. So the problem is, right, if we open this back up, I only really want these 4 images of the Yeti. So right now, what's happening is if I print to the screen the sprite sheet, let me do that right now. What you'll see is it's actually showing the entire sprite sheet. There you go. So if I go to, let me open another one. Let me pull that up really quick. And then basic, boom. As you can see, we've got our whole sprite sheet. And so what we need to do is we need to essentially segment that sprite sheet and just focus on getting those 4 Yetis that we care about. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to define special quads on that spreadsheet. So I'm going to call them game frames. So I'm going to call them G frames, and that's going to be a table. And then, you know what, there's 4 images of the Yeti I want, so I'm going to break it up into 4 quads for that Yeti. And I'm going to give it to the Yeti key, and that's going to be also a table. And so there's a function in love.graphics called new quads. Oops, new quad. And what that is looking for is the X value and the Y value of the image that you want to focus on, how wide and how tall that image is, and then in relation to the entire dimension of the sprite. So what I need essentially, if I open this, is I need the X value where this image starts. If we focus on the first one, and then the Y value where this image starts, and then the width and height. So I already got all of that, so I'm just going to copy paste it in. And essentially, I did this using, what's it called? A sprite. And on a sprite, there's a pretty cool function, essentially, if I show you here, where on the bottom left here, it'll tell you where the cursor is at from an XY. So this is X position 11, Y position 52. And this is 10, 53. And so what I did is I just measured the distance between this X value here and then the width. And then I did the same thing for the height for these 4 images. And once I got all of those, I just inputted them into each of these quads. And so now if I go to my LÖVE.draw and I essentially refer to one of those quads, oh, let me see, I did a quick typo. Let me fix that real quick. So if I go to Gframe and I filter down to Yeti, and then I just take the first quad, essentially I'm going to get my Yeti with its arms up. And you can see, I mean, it's really hard to see, but the Yeti, I only have one image of the Yeti up here. Okay, so now that we've done that, what we're going to need to do is we're essentially, when we add animation, right, what we're trying to do, oh, actually, you know what, before I start doing animation, let me attach the Yeti image to the movement, so that we actually move the Yeti. So our player graphic, right, is this circle, and so what we're going to do is we're going to actually replace the circle with this new LÖVE.draw that we did. And so all I need to do is just change this to px and py. And you know what, the Yeti was a little bit small, so let's make it a little bit bigger. And so now what I've done is I've actually attached the image of the Yeti to wherever the player, based on, you know, the arrow keys that you press. And so the Yeti is moving across the screen. So now what we need to do is we need to add some Yeti movement. So some animation. And you know what, actually I'm realizing the Yeti's arms are black and we've got a black screen. So maybe what we need to do is make the screen white and change all of the white to black. So let's do that really quick. So I'm actually going to move the Yeti all the way down, and then let's see, I'm going to make, so all of these lines here are going to need to be black. So I'm going to do LÖVE.graphics set color. And so to get black, I just need 0, 0, 0. And then what we need to do is we need to do a white background. And so I'm going to set this to 255. There we go. And then LÖVE.graphics. We're going to do a rectangle. We're going to fill it. It's going to be at 0, 0. And it's actually going to be the size of our window. So window size, window height. Perfect. And then I believe I want to reset my color. If not, my Yeti is going to be black and white. So I'm going to do LÖVE.graphics.reset here. Perfect. And so now we have our Yeti drawn on a white background and everything else is in black. That's actually pretty easy to, more easier to see what's going on. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to add animation for our Yeti. And so to do that, essentially what we need to do is we need to cycle between frames of the Yeti. So frame 1, frame 2, frame 1, frame 2. I need to go kind of 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And every time it shifts from one frame to the other, the Yeti arms and legs are going to move. So to do that, we're going to build a class. So for LÖVE2D, it's not an object-oriented language, but what you can do is you can emulate object-oriented programming by using classes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a library that I've added to the repo called class. And so using this, we're going to create an animation class. And so to do that, all the way at the bottom of our script, I'm going to create animation. I'm going to set it equal to a class. And what this is going to allow me to do is it's going to allow me to package functions to animation. And so that means that essentially anytime I call animation, I can call the classes as well as the variables associated with that class anywhere else in the code. And I can give it special features or special functions that apply just for the animation. And this makes it very scalable so that any character I want to add animations to, I can just call the class animation and pass it in the same variables to instantiate that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to define some new functions. And so because this is the animation class, instead of calling function love.something, what we're going to do is we're going to create function animation. So this refers to the class animation, and we're going to give it some functions. So the first function we're going to give it is an init. And what this does is essentially when we first call the animation class, it initializes our class. And this is a similar thing to love.load. Essentially, when we first load the game, it presets a lot of our variables. What this is going to do is it's going to preset a lot of whatever variables you need for the class. And so for animation, what we need is we need frames. We need a table of frames. We need to know how many frames do we need to cycle through. So I'm going to set self.frames, and I need the self here because I'm referring to the frames of the class, and so it needs to refer to itself. And so I'm going to pass in def, so it's taking a def argument and def.frames. So when I call the class object, what I need to pass in is a list of frames or a table of frames. I'm going to also ask for interval. So this is how much time between each frame do I need. So how long do I need to wait before I go from frame 1 to frame 2 back to frame 1. So again, this is going to be a user input. I could technically hard code that. And then I'm going to do self timer. So this is a way to track how much time has gone by between cycling through each frame. And this is going to be how I know that my interval's been reached and I should be switching frames. So I'm going to initiate that to 0. And finally, I'm going to set it to the first frame in my table. So I'm going to self.current frame equals 1. So this is my initializing function. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a update function. And so this update function is going to operate very similar to the love.update function, where every single moment it's going to run an update, and it's going to update essentially the frame that's selected so that I can cycle from frame 1 to frame 2. So essentially, right, what we're going to do is we're going to go from frame 1, and then we're going to go to frame 2, and then we're going to go back to frame 1, to frame 2, back to frame 1, to frame 2, back to frame 1, to frame 2. And it's going to check every moment. And it's going to shift between each frame based on the interval of time that I've defined. So to do this, we're essentially going to do, so we're going to do something really quick here. We're going to check how many frames I have to cycle through. So this is going to tell me, like, if there's more than one frame, then we're going to cycle each frame. If there's only one frame, that means there's no animation. We don't really need to do any kind of updates. So if it is bigger than 1, then what we're going to do is we're going to update our timer, and we're going to do that by doing self.timer equals self.timer plus dt. And if essentially our self.timer is bigger than the interval, then we're going to increment or change our frame from frame 1 to frame 2, and then back to frame 1 to frame 2. And so to do that, in this loop, what I'm going to first do is I'm going to reset my timer to 0. And to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to use the modulo method. And so essentially if we do 1 modulo 1, it's going to go back to 0. And since the timer reaches the same value as the interval, when you do timer modulo interval, it's just going to be 0. So this essentially is resetting our timer to 0. And then what we're going to do is we're going to update our frame. So current frame is going to be, and this is going to actually be between 1 and however many number of frames we have. So if we had 4 frame, it would be a number that would be either 1, 2, 3, 4. And so what we're going to do, right, because it can't be 0, we're going to do a math.max. And that's going to essentially return the bigger of the values. And so our minimum value is going to be 1. And then what we're going to do is we need to get a number that is between 1 and the number of frames that we have. And so to do that, what we can do is we can actually use the module function again. So if I do current frames and I add 1, so that means that this number here is at minimum 2, modulo the number of frames that we have. So if I have 2 frames, and I'm going to do +1. So essentially, like what's going to happen here, right? At the very beginning, when I'm on the first frame, it's going to be 2 modulo however many number of frames I have. And so if I have 2 frames, it's going to be 2 modulo 3, which essentially is going to return 2. Now, if I move to the second frame, it's going to be 2 + 1. That's going to be 3 modulo 3, which is going to be 1. And so that's going to essentially going to switch between 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, etc., etc. And then I'm going to close my if statements. And then finally, what we're going to do is we're going to create a function to return whatever frame we're in. And we're going to use that to update our drawing. So I'm going to do get frame. And that's going to be a simple function where we just do return. And so we do frames. Oops, I need self.frames. Self.frames. And we're going to return whatever value of that frame is. So we're going to do self.currentFrame. And so this is important because the frames are actually depending on the image. So this is frame 1, frame 2, this would be frame 3, and frame 4. If we break our animation into 2, so if we separate it here and we do frame 1 and 2, which is a cycle, that would mean we have 2 frames, and the current frame is either going to be 1 or 2. If we look at the second set of frames, 3 and 4, our first frame is actually going to be frame 3, and our second frame is going to be frame 4. And so what we need in our get frame is to return the number 3 or the number 4. So self-currentFrame is going to tell us which frame to get in the set of frame 3 and 4 or 1 and 2. Okay, so now what we have is we have our animation class all ready to go. And what we need to do is we need to bring it into our main code. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a idle Yeti object. And that's going to, this is where we're going to actually instantiate our class. We're going to create our class object. So idle Yeti is going to be a animation object. And what we need, right, is we need frames. Frames. And our idle Yeti is the first 2 frames. So we're going to pass in a table of 1 and 2. And then the interval, we're going to set it to 0.2 seconds. What we're going to do is we're going to do a chasing Yeti, or maybe running Yeti. And this is going to be a different animation object. And so this one is going to be our frames 3 and 4. 3 and 4. And we're going to set that interval to 0.2. And what we're actually going to do is we're going to, when we first load, we're going to set the Yeti to the idle animation so that when we first load the game, the Yeti is going to be idle. So we're going to do Yeti anim is going to be equal to idle Yeti. Perfect. And so what we need to do, so Yeti anim essentially now is also an animation object. It's just equal to the idle Yeti. And so in our love.update, what we're going to do is we're going to update our Yeti animation. And so it needs the delta time. So we're going to pass in the delta time. And so now the game, every frame is going to update, and then every frame our Yeti animation is going to update. And so if I go here and I replace this one with our Yeti anim, and then I call the getFrame function that we created, what's going to happen is when I load this, oh, I forgot I made a typo somewhere. Line 37, I forgot my commas. When I call this, oh, okay, I have another error. Sorry about that. So line 160. What? Oh, self.timer, I did a typo again. All right. Third time's the charm. Attempt to get length of field frame. What? Oh, I made a ton of typos. I'm sorry about that. Fourth time's the charm. Now you can see our Yeti is animated and moving. And so now what we want to do is when we move, so this is the idle Yeti, but you can see he's gliding across the screen. He's not really running. And what we want to do is we want to switch from his idle animation to his chasing or running animation. And so what we're going to do is we're going to update based on user input. So if I click the arrow keys, I'm going to switch between the running Yeti versus the idle Yeti. And so what we're going to do here is we're going to modify this body of code here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to replace all of these into else ifs. That'll be cleaner. Else if, oops. Else if, there we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my Yeti animation to my running Yeti. And so like this, whenever I click a key, it's going to switch to the running Yeti. The problem is there's no way to go back to my idle Yeti. So I'm actually going to add an else. So essentially if no key's been pressed, it's going to reset my Yeti animation to idle Yeti, like this. And so now if I run this, you see when I click the arrow key, it looks like my Yeti is running. So now the problem is the Yeti is moving a little bit fast, and it's kind of hurting my eyes a little bit, switching between these animations. So we're gonna change the speed of the different objects on the screen. So first thing we're going to do up here is we're going to set player move, and we're going to set that to 5, and then we're going to update our gravity to make the goalie or the square move faster. So we're going to set that to 15. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace wherever there's the player and I'm moving the player by gravity. I'm going to update it to just the player movement speed. All right, and now my Yeti's moving much slower, and you can see the goalie is moving faster. And if I press the space key, I shoot my projectile. So the problem with that is my score is now messed up because in my scoring logic, it's only incrementing the score by when the projectile X value is equal to the window width. But since my projectile speed is now 15 instead of 10, and 15 isn't a multiple of 500, it's not gonna, unless I start midway or a specific location on the screen, I'm not gonna get to 500. So we're gonna update this to greater or equal than. And now we've got, okay, well, this is a little bit harder because the screen is the goalie's moving a little bit faster. But yeah, now we've got our Yeti running around our map, and he's animated, which is really cool. And we are getting points. So cool, we just updated our game. So I'm going to make all of this code available on the repo. And hopefully this was interesting and helpful to understand like how you can build animation into the game. And I think the cool thing about building a class is that if we wanted to add other characters, maybe like replace this goalie with a different character, we could just call the class animation and animate that character as well, just like we did here. And so we'll probably do some more facelift and updates to this game in future videos. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in, and see you around.